Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to your latest online interaction that we call webinars. My name is Jackie Kenyuk. I'm the Program Delivery Manager in Asset Management for BC Nonprofit Housing Association, and I'll be your moderator for the morning. Today's webinar is Funding Opportunities and Energy Efficiency, sponsored and presented by FRESCo Building Energy Efficiency. I'd like to acknowledge this webinar is being delivered from various offices and homes in the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the home nations of the Lekwungen, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. We acknowledge that many of you are currently located in the ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples across the province and across Canada, with each their own unique traditions and history. If there's any technical questions or issues, please visit the GoToWebinar support. There's a URL down there. The presentation today will be approximately 45 minutes, followed by 20 minutes for an open Q&A, and our goal is to finish up before or by 11:30. This webinar is being recorded and the audience is muted, so you'll be able to hear us. We won't be able to hear you. But we are going to be looking for your questions, so please feel free to put those in the chat box at any time. There will be a recording of this webinar, and we'll send that out within a day or so, and you'll be able to access this PowerPoint from there, so don't worry if you've missed something today. We'll also be sending you a quick evaluation survey, and we appreciate a minute's time of your feedback. And I'll let you know about a couple other webinars that are coming up. There's quite a few of them in October now. We've got one about building in rural and small communities in early October. We're going to take a look at rent banks October 21st, as well as a webinar on partnerships on October 23rd. And then Brian Jung from the asset management team has a great panel put together about capital planning. And then later on in November, we're going to look at endotherm and gas savings for boilers. So all of the details about the webinars are on our website under education and webinars. Just before we start the presentation, I'd like to extend a big thank you to FRESCo Building Efficiency for being a BCNPHA education partner to enable online professional development opportunities like this one for the community housing sector. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Sophia and Jordan.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today on funding opportunities and energy efficiency. It's a real pleasure to be here today to speak to you. My name is Jordan Fisher, so I'm a senior program manager with FRESCo. FRESCo is an energy efficiency consulting firm that specializes in multifamily housing and social housing in particular. We do engineering design, project management, and a wide variety of energy efficiency projects. I've been working in this space about 15 years with a focus on business case analysis for energy efficiency and green building. I'm also a professional planner with a focus on energy and climate. And here today with one of our engineers, Sofia Marmolejo, and let Sofia introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Sofia. I work with Jordan at FRESCo. I'm a mechanical and electrical engineer, and I do the energy efficiency audits, the reports, and I can help you as well with some of the engineering design.
Thanks very much, Sofia. So before we jump into the main content, we wanted to start with a poll. So our friends at BCNPHA should be able to pop that up on your screen in a moment. It's really just asking what your role is within your organization.
Okay, we've got 82% of folks have voted so far. Looks like don't see it moving around anymore. So I can give the layout here. Oh, it's popped up. Great. You can see the results, everyone?
Great. So we've got a lot of others. We actually tried to have more categories, but the go-to meeting limited us to this. So I'm curious on what those other categories are. Feel free to throw them into the chat box if you like. But yeah, great to hear. So some asset managers, property managers, maintenance folks, and a few consultants as well. So thanks everybody for joining. So what are we going to talk about today? So today, we're going to start by talking about, why would you be interested in pursuing energy efficiency projects? We'll talk about the types of upgrades that you can undertake and give some examples of those. We'll talk a lot about the funding, various forms of funding opportunities available right now. It is a little bit confusing, but we'll do our best to try to make it as clear as we can. And we'll give you some examples of sort of how you might go through a funding process. And we'll give you some examples of retrofit projects that we've been involved with, and then talk a bit about next steps, how you could move forward. And then we will have some time for Q&A, good Q&A session at the end. So we're going to actually have another quick poll here. So I'll let folks, BCMPHA, pop that up on the screen. But so to what degree has energy efficiency and/or greenhouse gas reductions been considered during building upgrade projects that you've been involved with in the past? Wow, so that's great. So very few people who've not considered it previously. Looks like a few that have considered it a bit. Lots of people who say it's one important factor, and actually amazing, 31% for whom it's one of the key drivers in decision making. So that's really great. I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I'd say it's really in the last few years we've seen a big shift in how the focus people are putting on energy efficiency, which is awesome. So why pursue energy efficiency? Well, certainly one of the key reasons relates to cost. We're seeing some big increase in operating costs, and of course that creates some challenges in keeping rents affordable. So this graph that you see on the right, all those lines basically represent the rate of increase of various components of operating costs, taxes, utilities, insurance, things like that. The bars that you see are actually the allowable rent increases under the Residential Tenancy Act over those years. This is from 2009 to 2018. And until government changed, those bars, those increases would have represented basically inflation plus 2%. So in other words, even those bars are going up faster than inflation, but the costs are actually going up even faster than those at about 7.5% a year over that time. Now, at the same time, family incomes have only been going up at about 2.7% a year. And for persons not in families, that's how the feds define it, only at around 2.1% a year. So basically this means we're seeing costs go up quite a bit faster than incomes are going up. So it's really a huge challenge for how do we keep these buildings affordable for people in this challenging scenario. So of course, it's not all about the finances. Other reasons for pursuing these projects are making them part of the protection of your buildings and investment in the renewal of those assets. Also an increase in health and comfort. Often these kinds of upgrades really can make for a healthier indoor environment for our residents. And of course, reducing our environmental impact, and particularly now finally starting to see more of an emphasis on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So the kinds of upgrades, sort of broad categories of upgrades that we might look at include building enclosure, or sometimes called building envelope. The mechanical equipment in your building is a big part of the focus, building controls and building automation, lighting, and then even small things like water fixtures. So one of the key areas of energy use and of greenhouse gas emissions in buildings relates to heating through boilers as well as water heaters. So older boilers, like the ones on the left, and water heaters, typically were very low efficiency. And not only were they low efficiency, but they also lack modulation. And what modulation is If you can imagine, if you had a car that instead of a gas pedal, it just had an on and an off button, or maybe a high and a low button, and you basically just toggled between sort of revving your engine and being off the gas. You can imagine how that would not only be hard on your engine, but would actually use quite a lot of gas. So newer boilers not only are more efficient in their use of gas in terms of how they burn gas, but they also modulate. Basically, they sort of dial up or dial down to meet the needs. They also have better controls that more accurately match the needs of the building with the output of the equipment. So traditionally, high efficiency boilers has been most of what people have focused on in trying to move heat and hot water systems to high efficiency. But increasingly, we're seeing heat pumps used. And without getting a lot into the technology, essentially heat pumps are electrically fueled mechanical equipment that provides either heating and in some cases cooling, as well as hot. They're much higher efficiency than you could otherwise get with any other kind of heating system, and they have virtually no greenhouse gas emissions, at least in British Columbia, because of our reasonably low emission electricity grid. The flip side is electricity is quite a bit more expensive than gas, so we have this little bit of a trade-off between the dramatic improvement in efficiency, but also the higher cost of electricity compared to gas. So this is an example of a sort of a smaller scale type of heat pump, a ductless heat pump that's traditionally been used mostly in houses and townhouses, but we've actually started using them in multifamily buildings as well. They're extremely efficient. They provide heating as well as cooling, and that can really go a long way into not only improving comfort within the buildings, but especially as we're seeing hotter and hotter summers. Overheating actually can be a really significant health risk in buildings, and so this can really help us address those risks. In some cases, we're maybe upgrading from something like electric baseboards, and so that can really help us significantly reduce our electricity consumption while adding cooling. But we've also done some projects, and this one on the left actually represents a building that had a large oil-fired heating system. This is in Victoria, which we're able to replace with these heat pumps, so dramatically reducing greenhouse gas emissions, significantly decreasing energy use, while also providing a more comfortable environment and much better environmental performance. Many buildings also have ventilation equipment, and there are also options for, most of those are very low efficiency gas equipment, and there are options for higher efficiency gas equipment, and we've tested out a lot of those systems, and Fortis now has rebates for those systems. They also have some of the similar things I talked about with boilers, a better ability to modulate and have control. We also have ventilation now that enables for heat recovery, so basically to be able to extract heat from the air going out of the building through the ventilation and basically transfer that into the incoming air. And we also have heat pumps options. So this piece of equipment on the right is something we've used in a couple of recent high-rise ventilation upgrades that we've been involved with. And they come in both fully electric models as well as some hybrid models that basically still use gas during peak periods and use a heat pump for the most of the time. Building controls are really important. So building controls can help control those pieces of mechanical equipment, and in some cases, along with all kinds of other things. The image on the bottom left is what I would say one of the most common forms of controls in multifamily housing. Basically, a scrap of paper, if you can make it out, says, you know, you should set your system to 160 in the summer and 180 in the fall, and you know, this is what your pressure should be at. So this is probably my worst joke of the presentation, but this really is actually one of the most common ways that people effectively control their buildings. And as you can imagine, it's not a very efficient way to control our buildings. It doesn't really match the needs of the buildings with the output of our equipment and wastes quite a bit of energy. Moving up to the right from there, you'll see a simple controller. This is a TechMark controller that's quite common in buildings. And that really can help you sort of match the output of your equipment more with needs and make it respond to things like outdoor temperature. And then on the right, you see an example of a direct digital control system or a building automation system that enables you to have a much greater level of control. They have graphical interfaces. Nowadays, you can access them all from a mobile phone. They can send you alerts when there's something wrong in your building, and even have things like fault detection, which are basically use computer algorithms to try to alert you to a potential problem within your system. So these systems can be really powerful and give you a lot of control. They can let you control buildings remotely, so you could effectively have one operator controlling many different buildings across the portfolio, basically from anywhere. At the same time, controls are only as good as the people operating them. And so we sometimes see people putting in controls that are maybe more sophisticated than is appropriate, or maybe more sophisticated than the operators know how to use. So we used to say years ago when I got started in this, that if your building operator had a VCR that was flashing 12 o'clock, that you shouldn't buy a digital control system. That's my second bad joke in the presentation here. Yeah, quite seriously, you want to make sure that you have a system that is appropriate. And while you can sometimes, you see consultants helping with control systems, and it's great to get consultants help you in designing or setting up a system, but you really don't want to have to rely on external people to operate that system, where you can end up having, one, not really great use of those controls, and also really unreasonably high consulting costs to help operate your building. I'm going to turn it over to Sofia now, and she'll talk a little bit more about some other opportunities.
Yeah, one of the other opportunities that it's relatively straightforward to implement is lighting upgrades. So upgrading to LED and upgrading the controls. This is especially beneficial for any of those areas where your lighting is on all day. So by code, for example, parkades and hallways need to be on all day, but that's a considerable amount of energy consumption. So by upgrading, you can save a good amount of energy. And another benefit from upgrading your lighting, you also will benefit the well-being of the residents of the building. Examples would be all fluorescent light, white bright light for people, for example, say seniors that are sitting in a room all day. That's not very pleasant, and there's a lot of studies around how lighting affects well-being in different ranges. There's not a lot of challenges to lighting. There are multiple options for lighting, and rebates do not apply for all types of lighting, so it's good to review your options depending on the spaces. And another opportunity to improve buildings is through building enclosures and the opportunity to have a deep retrofit. So a good example would be, for example, the building we have there. It's a 100-year-old building where not only the envelope, but overall, like the mechanical systems, including the piping, have reached an end of life. So this is an opportunity to do a deep retrofit of the building, save energy, save greenhouse gases, improve the overall performance and comfort of the building, and then you kind of give a new life to your assets. It is better for greenhouse gas emissions to renovate rather than go to new construction. That being said, challenges with this would be a substantial funding is required, as well as planning, and not all the work can be done with residents in the building. So that's something that also needs to be accounted for. So now we're going to move on to our third poll. If we can, Jackie. So how much do you know about accessing funding in the building for building upgrades and implementing to improve your energy efficiency? We just want to have a feeling if this is something that you've been researching and you know a little bit, or haven't started at all, or maybe you're quite the expert and we can reach out to you for help. Okay, so we have a good mix. I think people sit kind of in the middle of the range of knowing a little bit to moderate. So that's great. We will talk about then funding options and even some new funding programs available that you might not have heard about, and other planning tools. And then the other range of funding is for capital projects. There's lots of different opportunities for funding, and it can be a bit confusing. So we'll give you an overview of some of the key opportunities and how they work. We're not going to go in detail because that would be very tedious, but feel free to connect with us. I would be happy to speak with you in more detail, help you figure out these programs and what would be the best fit for you. And BCNPHA is also a great resource for helping you learn more about the different funding opportunities.
Okay, sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, so we can move on to the next slide. Great. So now we're going to talk about some of the available funding programs, starting by the Social Housing Retrofit Support Program. We call from the acronyms, we call it SHRP. So this program is broadly applicable to social housing, co-ops, and First Nation housing providers. Before you enroll into SHRP, BCNPHA will do a free level 1 energy audit that will help you identify potential opportunities at a high level and decide if this program is a good fit for you. And then you can participate in the program in different levels. You can have a deep energy study, or you can see the overview of different upgrade opportunities with cost savings and applicable rebates. Then if you decide to move ahead with those opportunities, there's also implementation support. And this involves professional support to review the business cases for the options you selected, develop specifications, help tender the project, and oversee the contractor's work. There's a huge amount of rebates available for different upgrades, and they are quite higher than they are for the private sector. And there are also custom incentives, and those are tied into greenhouse gas emissions. So they show like $70 per ton of CO2 emissions saved in the life of the upgrade. And this requires more of a capital investment to achieve those, and it's more challenging, but it does unlock a great deal of opportunities.
Yeah. And so actually, and just to finish on this program, what we call SHRP. So yeah, this is a program that's been around. Jack and I were talking, I think it's maybe a couple of years now, so it's still relatively new. And it's neat because it brings together a few different really important components, both funding for, as Sofia said, the initial study itself, funding for implementation, basically engineering and professional support through to help you implement the process, as well as the rebate. So we're really going to kind of talk about all these programs sort of in two main baskets, I guess. One is sort of funding for studies and sort of support services, and the other is funding for capital. So BC Housing, for buildings that have an operating agreement, or generally requires an operating agreement, they have a pot of money that is sort of divided into two streams. So while that first program I talked about, or Sofia talked about, sort of covered both the sort of professional study kind of side of it and capital, this is focused on the capital. So there's two main streams, I guess, of this program. The first is called the Energy Efficiency Retrofit Program, or EERP. It's basically capital funding. Usually it's intended for sort of simpler or smaller scale projects. It provides funding on top of, in other words, in addition to other utility rebates, like the one Sofia just talked about. Examples might be a boiler upgrade or some lighting or hot water system upgrade. The funding amount, kind of a bit of a complex equation how they come up with it, but basically it's intended to be up to the full incremental cost. And what that means is essentially how much more it would cost you to put in an efficient system compared to a kind of a baseline less efficient system. But you also get utility rebates on top of that. So overall, you know, chatting with some colleagues at BC Housing, and they agreed somewhere in the range of 30 to 60% of sort of what would be typical when you include the rebates for the utility and ERP together, and funding up to about $100,000. Now, the other stream is called the Capital Renewal Funding, or CRF, and that's generally intended for more major upgrades. So that might be an enclosure, really major, or really when you're doing multiple kinds of different measures in one project. Heat pumps, even as a standalone, are often treated under the capital renewal funding just because they're considered a little bit more complex than a simple, say, boiler upgrade. Their funding actually can include some other non-energy related kinds of capital upgrades. And to make it more confusing, more recently, CRF is also starting to be used even on the ERP projects to sort of top up that funding amount. So let's say ERP and the utilities, maybe we're going to cover half of your capital costs. Sometimes now CRF will actually come in and provide the remaining costs. So that's subject to availability, and we don't know how long that's going to continue, but certainly that's been an amazing opportunity that we've seen. Now, CMHC, so these are federal funds. Generally, they require an active federally administered operating agreement. There's also a number of other requirements for CMHC funding that relate to building accessibility and support from other levels of government. So it's a little bit more complex. There is funding available both for the sort of planning or professional fees side of things, from 50 to 75K. As well, and that includes a number of things, including energy studies, as well as other things like building condition assessments and capital replacement reserve planning. And then there's also a capital side of that funding. And so that includes a mix of low interest loans and grants. And so that tends to be for larger capital investments. So this can be a really good option when you qualify for it, but we find that a lot of the buildings that we work with don't end up qualifying for this program. One we're really excited about is the Green Municipal Fund, which is part of the Federation, or offered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or FCM. So one of the reasons we're really interested in and excited about this program, we've been spending a lot of time recently working with FCM and chatting with FCM about how to best make use of this funding. So also they, for that sort of first stage of sort of planning and professional fees and studies, as well as for capital. So within the first stream would be the first sort of two boxes there, the planning and the study. And both of those can do sort of similar things, funding for various kinds of things, including energy studies. Maybe you want to create a plan, not just for an individual building, the way that SHIRT program, the Social Housing Retrofit Support Program, funded, basically a study for a building up to $5,000. This would actually be able to help you do a study, perhaps for your whole portfolio, or maybe you need a little bit more of an in-depth or more complex study, or maybe you want to include some non-energy things in that study, in those planning efforts. So this funding can help you do that. So the first level, what they call the planning grant, covers up to 80% of eligible costs. Will give you up to $25,000. And then the study one is actually up to $175,000, but only for 50% of eligible costs. We think probably for most societies, unless you have a really complex project or a very, very large portfolio, probably the planning stream is probably enough to help a lot of societies with their needs. And the really cool thing about this is that the grants are stackable with other funding. So let's say you got that planning grant and it was going to cover up to 80% of costs. You could still use another program, for example, like the SHIRT program that Sofia first talked about, to cover the remaining portion of costs. So this really helps you utilize SHIRT, utilize what it has to offer, but be able to go beyond that and do additional planning. There's some really other neat things about this that are kind of amazing, that are really atypical for program funding. One is that it can cover some costs that even before you've applied for the program. So let's say you have some work to do up front of just, getting the application together, deciding which buildings you put in. It can be a lot of work together, and putting that application together and sort of figuring out your strategy for that application. They'll actually even cover some of those costs. So for example, let's say you were to have a consultant were to help you with some of those, one of those efforts, they'd actually cover those costs I think, any work done up to, I think, 90 days before you apply. So one of the things we're starting to do with our customers, our clients, is we'll actually be engaged to help them with that process, and then all of those fees get covered once they get approved. And so we realize, though, for some societies, or probably all societies, it can be challenging to come up with the money, and take that risk, because of course you're not guaranteed to get approval. So we're now able to structure our fees so that basically, if you don't get that approval to cover those costs, that we would basically forgive those fees. So not something we typically do in the private sector, but something that we're trying to offer support social housing. The other kind of amazing thing is that those funds can even cover some of your internal costs, or some of your own admin costs, or some of even a portion of the wages of your own staff for their involvement in carrying out this work. Up to 10% of the funds can actually be used for that purpose. And so that's really amazing, because usually most programs don't allow for that. And we know that there is, even with great consultants and BCNPHA support, there is still undoubtedly going to be effort that's required on the part of society. And so that's something very few people are even aware of or taking advantage of. In addition, there is the next two boxes, which are really for capital funding. So the first is for pilot projects. So that's maybe something a bit more on the innovative side of things, and they'll cover up to 80% of costs as a grant, up to $500,000. And then their normal capital project funding, that provides a mix of financing and grants. And the amount that's the grant relates to your energy, the energy efficiency. So basically, if you had a 30% level of energy efficiency, you'll get about 30% of the funding as a grant compared to as a loan. They really want to focus on larger projects, in the sort of hundreds of thousands of dollars and up, and 5% improvement in energy efficiency. So one of the applications that we see for this, it could be for a really big project, or increasingly we're seeing, if you have a portfolio of buildings, rather than just sort of taking a piecemeal approach, you could use this funding to really take a kind of a more holistic planning approach, where maybe each individual project has a lower capital value, but collectively they have a big capital value, and they really like to see us bundling those projects together. So Sofia is going to sort of walk you through an example of sort of what's the process you would go through for funding. So we'll start with one that's sort of a relatively simple and straightforward project that was going to use the SHRP, or the Social Housing Retrofit Support Funding.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So let's assume you have just a single building and you want to go through the SHRP, and the first step would be to get advice. So talk to BCNPHA, and if you know a consultant that you like working with, chat with them early. Get an idea of the process, other funding opportunities, and make sure that SHRP is the right fit for you. Then BCNPHA will do a free level 1 energy audit, and this can help determine what kind of opportunities are in the building, and again, if it makes sense to proceed with the program. Then we recommend that you get a proposal for the deeper energy study soon. Typically, people wait until they get approved into the program to get the proposals, but it's better to do it early, because once you start the application and once you get approved, the clock starts ticking. There are planned timelines for this project, and although it is possible sometimes to get extensions, you're kind of running against the clock already. So if you've already spoke to a consultant early, then you can get an idea of cost and of timelines. Then suggest that you apply for the program through BCNPHA, and then conduct a study, an energy study with a consultant, and then review it with them. The next steps from there would be, once you review the energy study, you can select the desired upgrade options that you want to go for, and then secure funding. So there's various sources, as Jordan was talking to that point, and a good consultant in conjunction with BCNPHA can help you decide, what's the better option for you to get the funding. And once you want to go ahead with the program, with the implementation, you can get up to $7,000 of implementation support, and this would cover the design, specifications, helping you through the tendering process, and oversight for the construction. And so the last step would be to complete the work and obtain the funding. And last but not least, we recommend that you monitor performance. With any upgrade that you do, there might be some tweaking afterwards, just to make sure that your new systems are performing the way they should have. So it's good to, once you install it, set a timeline. You know, it could be 6 months or a year, to go back and make sure that everything is performing as it was supposed to.
Thanks,
Then we're going to move on to another example, Jordan.
Thanks so much. So yeah, so to kind of sum up, using that simple, sort of simple example of a single building, you'd get your studies and your professional fees funded through this SHRP program. And then you might use for the capital both the rebates through SHRP as well as some of the other funding sources. So a common example would be EERP. So sorry for all the acronyms, but basically those last two are the provincial funding, basically energy efficiency retrofit program and capital renewal funding. It's going to be a test on acronyms at the end of the presentation. Or not really. So here's an example of a project that might sort of fit into this model. So this is a boiler upgrade that we did with a housing society. So this project started a few years ago. It was actually just before SHRP existed, but it's the same basic process. It went through another program that also provided the free study and the support for the implementation. So basically analogous to this SHRP funding of $5K for the study, up to $5K for the study, and up to $7 for the implementation support. Basically, those engineering and services helping oversee the implementation. So that's worth about $12,000. Now the capital cost in this project. So this was a system that was replaced with a new modern high efficiency boiler system. The cost for that project were $130,000. The Fortis rebates that you get through the SHRP program were $24,000. Now on top of that, through the EERP provincial funding, there was another $56,000. So that meant that the net cost to the society was $50,000. Now I should note that in fact, the cost of even putting in a new inefficient system would have been more than $50,000, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 or $80,000. So already the society is now getting a good new efficient system for less money than even a low efficiency system would have cost. The other asterisk there I'd put is that nowadays we might even see projects like this have the other $50,000, the remaining $50,000 actually covered by the province as well. So the potential for even full covering if this project were to be done today. So this project, we've recently finished our review 1 year after installation. We had projected savings of about $6,600 a year. In actuality, $8,800 a year was saved. And the reason it was higher than estimated was sort of two reasons. One is that actually just we were a little bit conservative in our savings assumption, and the savings was a little bit higher than we had estimated in terms of the energy savings. But also gas costs actually went up since we originally did the estimate. So obviously it's not good that the gas costs are going up, but when they go up, it's good that the value of all of those savings is higher. So here's another example from a project that's actually in process right now. So this is a heat pump project. So this is a bit more innovative. So this is a replacement of an old inefficient gas system with a new high efficiency heat pump system that Vancouver Native Housing Society is doing and that we are the consultant for. So the total costs, and that included consulting fees. This project had reasonably high costs, in all honesty, as heat pump projects sometimes do, both because the technology is a bit more expensive than conventional gas technology, but also because there were some other considerations. There were some kind of costs, for example, we needed a structural engineer to look at up on the rooftop. There's some additional issues with permitting, the city of Vancouver for being able to do this. So costs are a little bit higher, in all honesty, than a traditional gas project. But it also got some good funding. So it ended up getting Clean BC, so sort of through the SHRP program, you would get access to this provincial funding focused on fuel switching to cleaner electricity. So they got $55,000 for that. And then the province's CRF fund basically met the rest of it for the capital. And then on top of that, SHRP provided $12,000 in funding, $5,000 for the study and $7,000 for the implementation support. So there was a little bit left over, just a small amount that wasn't fully covered. Although I should mention that some of these costs actually included some things beyond just this upgrade. So for example, there was some electrical work that maybe wasn't essential, but was just a good thing to do in the building that was done. There was some structural costs. There was some asbestos, hazardous material removal and removal of some old equipment in the building. So there was probably about 15 or 20K of sort of other costs beyond sort of the core. Now the savings, we estimated around $1,380. And so that may seem like not a huge amount of money. And part of the reason for that, and there is also some uncertainty in these numbers. And part of the reason for that, as I mentioned, is a fuel switching project. We on the one hand, have this potential for this huge improvement in energy efficiency. But on the flip side, we also have this challenge where the cost of electricity is a lot higher than it is for gas. So those sort of, we sort of have to weigh those against one another. But nonetheless, the really amazing thing is this gives us a 95% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And for this society, they were really prioritizing environmental leadership, and we're able to get a lot of support from the province to do this. And so it's really a pretty amazing project. And I think as time goes on and industry and contractors get more and more familiar with heat pumps, and there's more and more product coming on the market, we really believe heat pumps have just incredibly huge potential to help us really significantly reduce both energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. So that was for sort of, those examples were kind of a one-off, a single building with basically one main upgrade, maybe with a few other little components added on to it. So sometimes you might say, well, actually, I have a bunch of buildings that I'd like to do, and the traditional approach is most people just go and would get a bunch of individual SHRP studies. And one of the challenges with that is that you aren't, that doesn't really give you sort of a comprehensive plan. And so you still want to be able to look at a portfolio and look at all those options and try to prioritize them and weigh them against each other. So this example is sort of going to go over how you might go about doing that. So again, and again, also potentially integrating some non-energy considerations into the process and other maybe capital that you need to spend. Get advice. And again, really talking to BCMPHA, BCMPHA is this really great resource that's there to help you, and they can really help you through this process and help give you advice on the different kinds of opportunities and how to approach them. But we also recommend getting involved with a consultant very early. A good consultant will work really well and collaborate with BCMPHA throughout that process. So once you've determined, okay, is this the right approach? And let's say you decide, we think we're going to use this FCM funding that we talked about. So this federal funding that allows you to do a portfolio, it allows you to get a much larger amount of funding than you could get through something like SHRP alone. So you can go through that process, and as I mentioned, you might want to get help with that process, and the funding can even cover the costs even before you've actually gotten into the program to help with some of those applications. So you create a proposal, and it actually starts with a sort of a smaller basic proposal that you submit for them to determine if you look like you'll be. Point you would then do the full, more detailed proposal. So in conjunction with this, you're going to want to get a proposal from your consultant so that you have an idea of what it's going to cost to carry out this work, basically this upfront studies and planning work. And FCM is quite flexible, and so when you look through all the details in the program, it may seem at first, and to us it seemed not entirely clear exactly what it did and didn't allow and how to meet all the rules. And when we talked with FCM a lot about that, and they said that's really because they're trying to be flexible. But they, the way they put it is they said, we're in the business of trying to support projects and approve projects. So they really are looking for ways to support you and looking for ways to help you improve your buildings. And these studies are really intended to get you as close as possible to being ready to go with carrying out an improvement. So you'll go conduct your study and your plan, and then through that, figure out what actions you want to take and help prioritize those across your different buildings. And once you've done that, you'll apply for funding, and that funding and financing may come from various sources. And sorry, I just want to be clear on that first step of those studies. Just as a reminder, that funding's stackable, meaning you might say, well, we're going to do a bunch of studies, and we can still go through SHRP, and basically get access to the $5K per building for those studies. And then this funding could be on top of that funding to either do more deep portfolio and planning, or integrate non-energy considerations, or maybe there's just some more in-depth planning you need to do beyond what SHRP can provide. And this funding can help you get there and get collectively 100% of those costs covered. So once you've got your plan and you know what you want to do, then you apply for funding. And similarly, you can use multiple sources. So you can use the capital funding that we talked about through FCM. You can also still use other funding sources like the funding through SHRP in the province, and really come up with a package with the support of BCMPHA and your consultant to come up with a package that potentially could fund 100% of the costs. And as always, we always recommend that you really do have a good process in place for how you're going to monitor the performance of your equipment and ensure, or your upgrade, and ensure it's operating effectively. And where possible, really look to opportunities, capital needs you have. Maybe even you have a elevator upgrade need, or something else like that you could integrate with these energy efficiency projects. They don't want to see millions of applications. So unlike SHRP, where you might apply time and time again for different buildings, they really would prefer to see that you bundle those together and that you apply sort of in one batch. So next steps, sort of as we're coming to a close on the presentation. So the next thing that you can do is, number one, start by looking at your portfolio. Maybe you have one building, maybe you have a bunch of buildings, but try to do that. Talk to your internal team, your operations folks, and the key people in your organization. Try to get at least an initial kind of look at what are your key priorities. Maybe you have a building that has a particular need, it has a or that you're worried it's sort of past end of life, and start at least getting an initial idea, and then get some advice. Again, PCMPHA is a really great place to start with trying to get some advice and support. And we do recommend, whatever you're considering, really do try and get advice from consultants early, and start speaking with consultants really early, both so you can get an idea of what costs are going to be for whatever work you want to do, but also so you understand the process and that you really have a good handle on timelines. And I guess the next thing I really encourage people to try to do is to really start right away, start early. It does take some time to go through this process, both internally within your organization. You're going to need some time to look at your portfolio, gather information, speaking to BCMPHA, reaching out to your consultants. There's a certain amount of time that's involved in that, as well as the process of going through whatever applications that you need to go through for any of these various programs that you decide are a good fit for you. And so you want to allow time for that. And then, of course, even once you've done that, you need time to conduct a study. You need internal time to make those decisions about what you're going to focus on. You may have some internal approval processes that you need to go through depending on the structure of your organization, depending how long those are going to take. And so there is a bit of a process. And I think often, people kind of, when they do it, they just want to get it done and get it done right away. But it is good to really think of this as a process and really try to work with BCMPHA and your consultant to sort of map out that process and get a real understanding of what that timeline is for each of the various steps that are involved. We really want to try to avoid unplanned replacements. So, for example, there was one building manager that I've been speaking to for about a year about a domestic hot water upgrade. Their system was working, but they knew it was past end of life, and they were thinking of doing it. But of course, like everyone, they're really busy. They had a lot of things on their plate, and it just kept getting put off. They ended up calling me one day, it was December 24th, that the system had failed, and now they were ready to move forward, and could I help them? And it was a really challenging situation. You know, we really wanted to help them, but the fact is they had no hot water. It was coming up on Christmas Eve. And all of the sort of normal process we'd like to go through to really focus on really well thought out planning to how we make the best upgrade that's the best fit for the building, that is going to work well and be reliable and be efficient, and make sure we can go out and get the available funding to help cover the cost of that. All of that kind of takes a backseat to expediency when we're in an emergency replacement situation. So, you know, as much as we understand the desire to kind of delay capital expenditures until you really need to spend them, hopefully you've already done some capital planning, and I know BCMPHA has a webinar coming up on capital planning, but hopefully you've done some capital planning and really try to get ahead of these things, and try to start early. And then really try to take advantage of all this different funding. And so before you just jump into saying, oh, we're just going to go into this particular program and just sort of run with it, really try to take a step back and really look at it and see if something like maybe taking a portfolio approach and planning in a more comprehensive way, and really make sure that you're really taking advantage of the funding that's out there. So I've been doing this work in one way or another in energy efficiency for about 15 years, and I'll say that right now is the greatest time that I've ever seen for funding for social housing for energy efficiency. It's just incredible when we look at the range of rebates that are available from utilities, funding available for fuel switching, funding for studies, funding for implementation support and engineering, as well as some very significant funding for capital. If you have any projects that you've been thinking about maybe doing, or thinking about maybe doing some planning for your portfolio, this really is the best time that I've seen in my career to do that. Obviously, you know, we never know how long that kind of funding will be around. There's always potential for changes in the economy or political changes or program changes. So this really is, you know, one thing I've learned in my time in this business is, you know, when these opportunities present themselves, you really have to strike while the iron is hot. So I'd really encourage everybody to really seize the moment, you know, and really try to take advantage of this amazing opportunity that we're really blessed to have right now to finally start seeing some more support for the social housing sector. So thanks very much for that. We're going to have some Q&A in a moment. Before we do that, we're going to go to our next and final poll. So how prepared do you feel to move forward with accessing funding and pursuing building upgrades that will help you improve energy efficiency? Okay, thanks. So looks like nobody's lost, so that's a good idea. That's a good start. About a quarter of people that seem to have a bit of knowledge, and a little over half that at least feel like they have some idea of what to do next, and about just under a quarter that are really confident. At number 5, nobody having a perfect idea of how to move forward. So I would encourage, you know, at least, you know, people have a bit of a sense now of how they move forward, and I hope it wasn't too confusing. I know there's a lot of different funding and a lot of different opportunities that are out there, but really encourage you to, you know, speak with BCMPHA. They can help you with getting started. Start talking to consultants that can help you in getting started with this process, and hopefully through those supports, you can get a clear idea and have everybody at the number 5. So this is a thank you very much, and thanks to BCMPHA for our organizing this. And yeah, we'd love to hear your questions. I think, Jackie, is it through the chat box, the questions?
Yes, yeah, through the chat. You might not be able to see the questions, but I'll be able to see them and relay them to Jordan and Sophia. I'm really curious to hear questions or people's experiences with some of these projects. I think we might have some societies on the webinar who have done some of these retrofits. So if they wanted to provide any comments.
And I'll say as well that people have really, certainly we welcome any questions. If there's any really specific questions or stuff we're maybe not quite able to answer right now on the call, certainly Sofia and I would be happy to follow up with folks and chat with you afterwards in more detail.
Excellent. While we're waiting for them to come in, I guess I could ask, I know about just COVID related, like how you've been seeing that as consultants, and whether you've had contractors still going on sites, and can you speak to that?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So yeah, so when COVID first hit, we had paused a lot of our site visit work, particularly in facilities that were serving more vulnerable populations, like seniors, as an example. So we've been working really hard in working with utilities and BCNPHA and others, and following all the provincial health standards. So our organization has put in place a really strict set of health and safety protocols. We are now doing two things. So one is, yes, we are going back to buildings now. We are conducting audits and doing engineering work and doing all of that. We do it with some pretty strict protocols, which means that more than what pre-COVID you'd hear from us prior to a site visit, to ask some questions and evaluate any potential health or safety risks prior to actually coming on site. We also have, masks and gloves and sort of really strict protocols around social distancing and that sort of stuff. We are generally avoiding, where possible, really going into any occupied suites. So we're more focusing on things like mechanical rooms, rooftops, kind of common areas. And I'd say in addition to that, if there are buildings that it's not a good idea for us to go in person, or people who aren't comfortable, we've actually developed, with the help of Fortis, we have developed for Fortis some approaches and protocols to doing virtual audits. And so we are now, through both a combination of video conferencing, photos, and phone interviews, able to actually virtually visit buildings. And there's actually quite a lot that we can do even without physically going to a building.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, same with BCNPHA. I've been able to do some virtual audits. Sandy White has asked if she can request an energy audit to get an idea of what could be done. Absolutely, I can. If you have your contact information, share it, then I can definitely follow up about that. Hans has a question, says, hello all, thank you for the presentation. Would you know if lights on at all times in certain areas can be bypassed, regarding building code with motion sensors? That's a great energy conservation measure. If you could speak more to that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. You're right. For some areas, it can be turned on with motion sensors, but for areas that are critical, for example, staircases, you wouldn't turn the lights completely, but you can dim them to a significant percentage. So you would still have a low-level lighting, but as soon as someone, for example, goes into a parkade or goes into the staircase, then the lights will bright on. So yeah, there's definitely ways you can control the lighting and still be within your building code requirements.
Great. Yeah, that's a great measure that can be done in stairwells and parkades. It's some really good.
And technology, has come pretty far. You have a lot of options for controls. Like you can have, going back to a hardwire controller in your electrical room, that's, definitely there. But for installations where you don't want to go that route, there's even smart bulbs right now where even the controls are right into the fixture. Or you can put just controllers by zone, so you could have a motion detector in specific key areas, and then just even some of those wirelessly connect to the fixtures. So there's a lot of options out there that can adapt to your building and your needs, for sure.
Great. Okay. There's quite a few people that are asking about applying for funds. And if anyone could help and follow up, absolutely. BCMPJ, I'd be happy to follow up. If anyone even wants to just put, yes, I'd like an energy audit. If you wanted to put that in the comments, then I can follow up after the call. Any other questions regarding for Sophia and for Jordan? Yeah, so Jordan, you've been in the industry for 15 years and said that there's quite a lot more funding opportunities now than ever before. Yeah, and I guess I wonder if you could speak a bit more about, yeah, just like what, and I guess the social housing retrofit support program has been, was launched, yeah, I guess it's been working in earnest for about 2 years. I wonder if you or Sophia could speak a bit more to how that has been helping projects move ahead.
Yeah, so it's been a huge advancement. When I started working in social housing, I think there was one person at BCNPHA who did anything with energy efficiency. I don't know, how many do you have now? I'm not even sure.
I believe we're 8 now,
So there's been this huge growth, and that was even before SHRP, I think, that started a social housing retrofit support program. And so I think that's been a big part of it, actually, is just having BCNPHA who's there as a resource for the industry, for societies, to be able to give them some of that support, to be able to give them some of that advice. When social housing retrofit support program came in, our company had been running a program called the Rental Apartment Efficiency Program, and that was primarily developed for the private sector, so basically for market rental housing. And there were some societies that would participate in that program because SHRP didn't really exist back then. And that program really kind of pioneered an approach to what we now call implementation support, whereas before that, there was a little bit of funding available for studies, but not a ton. There was some funding available for, rebates and that kind of thing, but not a ton. And before that, there was no funding available for this sort of support of implementation, which meant you'd still have to go out and spend a lot of money to hire a consultant like us if you actually wanted professional support. So what SHRP did was a few things. So number one, it allowed this direct collaboration with BCNPHA. So in a formal way, BCNPHA could be looped in from the beginning and really help you figure out what is it that's going to help you meet and know that BCNPHA is an organization that you can trust, that's really there to help you meet your needs. The other thing it did was bringing through these different funding sources. So what I didn't show was that SHRP is actually made up of a bunch of different things. And I thought it would be confusing to show, but it's run by Fortis, but it's actually done in collaboration with BC Hydro and with the province. And what that means is behind the scenes, you won't see the sausage getting made, but behind the scenes, there's actually a bunch of different funding programs that are coming together with rebates from the utilities, some money's coming from the province for fuel switching, and they all work it out amongst themselves on the back end. And what that meant is that SHRP provided, at least for sort of utility and fuel switching funding, which really is coming from multiple pots, provided one central portal that enabled you to basically access that support. And we think that that has really been evolution to create a little bit more of a streamlined process. So if you can imagine how confusing maybe even things seemed in this presentation, how much more confusing it would be if you didn't have SHRP there to sort of bring some of those different pieces together along with the BCNPHA resources to help you through the process. So I think the next evolution that we're seeing, so we've done a bunch of SHRP work, really since the first day that it started, and even a lot of similar social housing work before SHRP existed through other programs and also just as consultants. But what we found is mostly SHRP has been sort of a piecemeal approach. It's mostly been, I have a building or maybe a few buildings, I'll get some separate studies. And there hasn't been a ton of formal approach to really bringing those together in terms of a more comprehensive approach to planning. And that's where I think this next evolution is going to really see us doing a better job bringing together this amazing thing that SHRP offers with things like what FCM offers or other programs offer, so that we can go beyond SHRP and take a more comprehensive sort of portfolio-wide approach to planning and be able to really integrate also non-energy things into this planning and plan in a more comprehensive way that's going to help us go deeper, that's going to help provide support to societies throughout the whole process, and really help you take action and take advantage of it. So it's been really great to see this evolution that we're seeing from governments and utilities sort of just giving away rebates or giving away funding to actually providing support to help you make the most out of the funding and really help you improve your buildings.
Great, thank you. Everything has been so far. I would like an energy audit, maybe on multiple buildings. So thank you, Tony, Susan, Sandy. I will be in touch. I have your contact information. So I guess that means I think you have inspired people, Jordan and Sofia, to take action, and that it really is an opportune moment in the funding for community housing. So. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'd just like to thank you, Sofia and Jordan, so much for an excellent presentation and for your time today. Thank you to all the attendees for your questions and for your attention. We'll be sending this recording and the visual, the PowerPoint slides in the next few days. This recording, all of our recordings will also be available now on our website, just under education and webinars, so you can check out any ones that you've missed along the way. And any upcoming events and webinars are on there as well. And if you think you've got any other buildings that you think could be performing better, you can message me at energy@bcnpha.ca. We do energy audits anywhere throughout BC. So give us a shout. You can give Sofia and Jordan a shout if you have questions about their services. Thanks again, everyone, and take care.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks. My pleasure.